Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the DC Bar Law Student Community Podcast, Let's Breathe It. I'm your host, Jivan Ramesh, and today we will be talking to iconic trailblazer and Congresswoman Sarah McBride, who represents Delaware's at-large congressional district. We're so lucky to have her on.
Thank you so much for having me on and for that incredible compliment. Iconic is the most iconic word you can use to describe someone, so thank you.
Of course. Now, of course, you've had a little bit of a unique path to becoming an elected official, from your work as a press secretary to a human rights coalition, and also your initial work staffing for Beau Biden. So could you tell us a little bit more about your path towards being elected?
Sure. Well, in many ways, my journey to public office, my journey to Congress has been a journey back to hope for me. As a young person, I faced a crisis of hope. As a young person, someone who was buried deep in the closet and fearful that the heart of this country was not big enough to love someone like me, I went searching for hope. I was a lucky person. I lucked out in the parent lottery. I lucked out in the family lottery. I'm the child of an attorney. My older brother is an attorney. So I'm certainly not one for support and love and opportunity. But like so many young people across this country to this day, I started to realize very early on that there was something about me that this world did not approve of, and that the structures of our society, the cultural mores, and in many ways the legal realities were not structured for someone like me to live openly, unauthentically, fully, and freely in our society. And I went searching for hope as a young person. And I wanted to actually be an architect when I was a kid. I still think architecture is the most beautiful form of art that exists. And I used to read different books about buildings around the world. And I stumbled across books about the Capitol and the White House as a kid. And I found a little bit of hope, because as I read those books, I started to marvel not just at the beauty of the buildings, but at the history that occurred within their walls. Because I saw that the through line of every chapter of our political history has been the story of advocates, activists, and a handful of effective and courageous elected officials working together to right the wrongs of our past, to address injustice, to bring people from the shadows and the margins of society into the circle of opportunity. And I found hope in that story and in the possibilities in our politics. So I got involved. I, as you mentioned, worked for our former governor, Jack Markell. I had the chance to work for our late Attorney General, Beau Biden. I had the opportunity, the privilege of interning in the Obama White House as a college student, and then eventually went on to become an advocate working on LGBTQ rights, where I became the national spokesperson for the Human Rights Campaign before getting elected to the state Senate in 2020, where I served for 4 years before seeking the open at-large congressional seat. And what is, let me just say, the greatest state in the union. DC is a great state, but Delaware is obviously the greatest.
Absolutely. So, what was it like for you transitioning from being an advocate, as you mentioned, with LGBTQ plus rights organizations to being the person with the power to actually make the laws yourself in the state Senate?
Well, I'm good at transitioning, so it was a smooth process. No, in many ways, I saw my job as an advocate to be a representative for a community, in that case, the LGBTQ community, and to bring their voices, their needs, their hopes, their dreams to the halls of power, to state legislatures, to the Capitol, to the White House, and to make sure that as an advocate, I was a bridge between the two and was employing on behalf of the hopes and the dreams and the fears of this community that I represented my ability and my skills, and hopefully a strategic and tactical approach to effectively deliver for that community. And so when I became a state senator and then a member of Congress, in many ways, the parameters of the role aren't that different. I represent a community in the halls of power. I bring their hopes and their dreams and their fears with me, and I use what skills I have to effectively advocate for those constituents, for that community, in this case, the great state of Delaware, in Congress. And that is a very, very similar role to what I had. The difference is obviously the constituency, the community that I'm representing. And obviously, I represent LGBTQ people in Delaware, but I also represent everyone else in Delaware, people outside the LGBTQ community, people across the ideological divide, people who voted for me in the last election, people who didn't vote for me in the last election, people who didn't vote at all in the last election. And that dynamic is a top of mind responsibility that I have, and that obviously creates, in some cases, expectations from communities I am a part of or communities that I have previously been a sort of direct advocate for about how I will conduct myself or how I should conduct myself. But I know that the only way that I can do right by the LGBTQ community is for me to quite simply be the best member of Congress I can be on all of the issues that matter.
That makes a lot of sense. Obviously, when you moved from the state Senate to Congress, you had already had experience in legislating. But what was it like for you, especially with the weight of being the first transgender congressperson? And especially with, I mean, Delaware's a pretty blue state, but the Congress is much more split. So, what was it like, especially dealing with colleagues who maybe don't accept trans people?
hmm So Delaware is certainly a blue state, and I was part of a Democratic trifecta, but I still worked with very conservative members of the Delaware General Assembly. And despite having a blue trifecta, I was very intentional about working across the aisle and across political disagreement to try to find common ground where it was possible. And I am proud that during my time in the state Senate, nearly every bill that I introduced and passed with bipartisan support, even though that wasn't logistically necessary because we had a trifecta. And so I've taken that same approach to the halls of Congress, where, to your point, it's a lot more logistically necessary to work collaboratively. I am in the minority. And even if I weren't in the minority, the nature of how Congress works, and certainly the nature of how the other chamber works, means that solutions that can find bipartisan support in one chamber are much more likely to be able to find bipartisan support in another chamber, and therefore much more likely to be able to pass Congress and become the law, which is fundamentally our job. So I continue to employ a very similar governing approach in the Congress as to the one I pursued in the Delaware State Senate. Obviously, I am entering a place where there are more people than in the Delaware State Senate who have positions on issues that are deeply personal to me at a greater scale and with a greater volume than what I faced in the Delaware State Senate. And I always knew when I was running for Congress that regardless of which party controlled Congress, that there would be people in the House who would seek to use my service, who would seek to use my identity as an opportunity to gain attention for themselves. And I always knew that my job was going to be not to give them the response that they wanted. And that is in part because I know that if you don't take the bait, if you don't respond the way they want you to respond, that it removes the incentive for them to continue to come after you in the same way. They are employing the politics of reality TV, and the way to get attention in reality TV is to throw wine in someone's face. That gets you a couple of minutes on an episode. But the way to get a season-long story arc is if the person who you threw wine in the face of responds by throwing wine back. That gets you a beef and a feud and a full season. And if I want to guarantee that they don't get a full season, if I want to guarantee that they don't have the same attention incentive to come after me, that means refraining from throwing wine back. And that has resulted in the indignities that I have faced dropping dramatically. It's also resulted in a number of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle who maybe aren't professional provocateurs to see that seriousness of purpose and that willingness to work across disagreement. And it has resulted in them coming up to me and saying, not only welcome to Congress, not only I'm sorry at the way they're treating you, but let's find opportunities to work together, they'll say, because we want to show people that not everyone here is like that. And it's actually resulted in me being able to introduce more bipartisan bills than any other freshman this Congress on issues ranging from consumer protections to family leave benefits to international human rights, all of which I've been able to work on in a bipartisan fashion. But I also think more broadly, the reason why these attacks are happening, not just against me, but against other people like me across the country, is because it's politically possible to do it. It taps into a appetite among their base, and it's tolerated by enough people within the public. And the way to stop these attacks is to change the public narrative. It's to change public opinion. And I don't believe that public opinion is where it is because we weren't shaming and blaming people enough. I do believe that if we want to win public opinion back, we've got to learn the lessons of the most successful social movements, whether it was social movements in the 60s or social movements in the mid 2000s that helped to deliver marriage equality. And that is that we have to have the courage not only to preach to our choir, but to grow our congregation. We have to have discipline and strategic thinking. And that means picking battles. It means speaking to people where they are rather than just in ways that feel viscerally comforting to ourselves. And it means giving the public a very clear visual contrast between who the bullies are and who the bullied are. And that has been a North Star for me as I've served in Congress when I have been the one under attack. It's to give the public a very clear visual contrast. If I throw that wine back in their faces, it's a pox on both of our houses. It's just two people fighting. It's just two people diminishing the integrity of the institution of Congress. It's two people performing rather than delivering progress. And I want the public, as they scroll on social media and maybe see a half a second to a second of content related to what I'm facing, I want them in that half of a second to see very clearly from what I do, how I act, and what I say, who the one is that's obsessed with trans issues and who is the one that's focused on all of the issues, and who is the one that is being serious and responsible, and who is the one that's being a child.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And you have certainly delivered on that. You have written so many bills on so many issues. The issue I wanted to talk to you a bit more on is human rights. You sit on the Foreign Affairs Committee, and you recently traveled to the Munich Security Conference. And also, in your work experience, you did do work in that field. So I want to know what your experience, especially now on the committee, has shown you regarding the states of human rights broadly, LGBTQ rights, of course, but all of them, both abroad and in the United States, and where you think it's going.
Well, I think human rights, both at home and around the world, are facing significant challenges and a real moment of great strain and a real test. That is partly true because over the last year and a half, the United States has receded from its historic role as a not only beacon of freedom, but a defender of freedom, an imperfect defender, but one that seeks to pursue the aspiration of human rights at home and abroad. And certainly one that seeks to pursue the journey toward a deepening sense of freedom and more realized human rights for more people. Unfortunately, right now, we are seeing a fundamental remake of the global rules based moral order. Again, it's a global order that was never fully realized. It was unfortunately not equally applied in every circumstance. But as is often the case with the law, as is often the case with the enforcement of the law, it is imperfect and subject to the biases of humans and the biases of the most powerful. But that does not mean that we should give up on it as an aspiration, as a system of organizing ourselves and our society. Because the reality is, as imperfect as it has been, the post World War II global order has not only fostered the longest peace between great powers in human history, thus diminishing the loss of human life, but it has also, in so doing, recognized both the inherent dignity of the individual and, as a byproduct of that, the inherent dignity of the collective, of nation states. That the sovereignty of a nation state is of paramount importance. And regardless of your power, regardless of your size, international rules protect the small and the weak and the poor just as much as it seeks to protect the strong and the powerful and the wealthy. And right now, we have seen many with cynical ends and others with understandable cynicism give up on that order and seek to destroy it. And those who are pursuing it for cynical ends are seeking to destroy it so that the strong can plunder the weak, so that they can usher in what is essentially a might makes right in my neighborhood global order, one that doesn't recognize the individual dignity of nations nor the individual dignity of a person. And those two go hand in hand, where human rights flourishes, liberal democracy flourishes, and vice versa. And in this moment, I believe it is incumbent upon those of us in positions of power to not just protect and defend that rules-based moral order, but to figure out how we can build it better, to recognize that the threat that it is facing is not just from the cynical politician, but from the great cynicism that is out there, that is a byproduct of the fact that we have imperfectly sought to uphold that moral order, that it has been unevenly applied and not universally applied. And so I believe that as a young person in Congress, we have to grapple with that reality. We have to be crystal clear about where we fell short and how we should do better, but also recognize that the destruction of what has been, rather than the building of something better, poses grave risks, as we have already seen, to the rights of people and the rights of nations, whether that's in the Middle East, whether that's in East Asia, whether that's in Eastern Europe, or whether that's here at home right now.
Absolutely. And here at home in particular, there have certainly been some challenges to human rights. In your experiences in Congress, what do you think Congress's role should be in supporting human rights, especially with the current situations in both Supreme Court orders and in recent executive orders?
Well, I think the responsibility of our government and our Congress is to promote and protect human rights at home and around the world. And what we do here matters. What we do here matters specifically in the context of international human rights. And I'll start there and then I'll go back to sort of how we protect human rights here at home. But globally, the United States, it's easy for us to see where we fall short. It is a lot harder to recognize and realize where we have done right and where we have done good. I was an advocate, as we've talked about before this, and I met with advocates around the world. And I'll never forget a particular meeting I had with LGBT human rights advocates in South Africa several years ago from other Southern African nations. South Africa was the only Southern African nation where it was really safe for us to meet collectively. But I met with advocates who were doing work in almost incomprehensible circumstances to someone like me, to anyone who frankly lives in the United States. And what I would uniformly hear from many of those advocates, what I would hear from advocates in other places like Hungary or Russia, is that the only place in some of these cases where they knew that they were truly safe was in buildings that had the American flag flying atop them. It was in our embassies, it was in our consulates. And unfortunately, that is not the reality anymore. The United States is actively undermining human rights around the world with our policies and with our actions. And it's turned our back on many vulnerable people globally that over the last several decades relied on us for safety, for sanctuary, and for support. Here at home, we are similarly seeing a retreat of the kinds of protections that we have relied on. We've seen that the literal dismantling and decimation of federal agencies' offices for civil rights at places like the Department of Education, the Department of Justice, the bodies that have been charged with actually protecting the civil rights of Americans, places like the EEOC as well, where we are not only seeing them dismantled, but in bad faith utilizing what little remains to actually target the vulnerable and the marginalized in our country, to use the tools of state that have been created to protect people of color and LGBTQ people and women and religious minorities, and actually to weaponize them against those communities in false support for the majority, for the powerful. I don't believe that weaponizing the Department of Justice against Black people is in the interest of white people, but that is what this administration has sort of put forward. They are not only doing that, they are then also weaponizing the laws themselves to abridge free speech and to go after the most vulnerable in our society, including LGBTQ people. That should not diminish our resolve to secure nationwide non-discrimination protections for LGBTQ people, to make it abundantly clear that LGBTQ people, like all people, are protected from discrimination throughout daily life. It does not change the fact that the US Supreme Court, no matter how conservative it is, actually ruled in 2020 in the Bostock decision that existing protections based on sex include protections for people based on discrimination rooted in their sexual orientation or gender identity. And it should not diminish our resolve to continue to open hearts and change minds. I think right now it's really easy to sort of give up. It's easy to feel hopeless, but you cannot tell me in this moment that the reasons for hopelessness now are greater than at almost any other point in our country's history. We have had a politics that doesn't work for the vulnerable. We have had a politics in the past that hasn't delivered for all of our people, let alone some of our people. And knowing that we've been here before, for me, is actually of great comfort because it reminds me that we have found a path out of this kind of politics before, and that is our responsibility in this moment. And I think as we come back, I think one of the things, though, we have to be mindful of is how do we make sure that the policies and protections and the agencies that we rebuild, that we create moving forward are essentially authoritarian proof, that they can't be, as they have been over the last year, weaponized against the very people that they're seeking to protect. And that's not going to be easy, but I think the last year has been sobering for all of us that is unfortunately the reality when you are dealing with an authoritarian statist force that is willing, unlike it was maybe 20 or 30 years ago, to actually weaponize those very powers in attacking the people that they were created to protect.
Absolutely. There are definitely many reforms that need to be made. But you've been writing quite a lot of bills. I wanted to ask, just as the final question, which of your bills that you have been submitting lately, specifically in the human rights space, do you think might have the most impact, and or what are some things that you particularly want to do?
Well, there's no question that the legislation that I've mentioned already, whether it's the Global Respect Act, which is my bipartisan bill that would restore America's role as a defender of LGBTQ human rights globally, is an urgent necessity and has bipartisan support. Obviously, domestically, I continue to believe that we need comprehensive civil rights protections explicitly under federal law throughout daily life for the LGBTQ community. But I also think we have to recognize that you can't defend the American experiment if you don't make the American dream affordable and accessible for people. When I first got into Congress, one of the first speeches I gave was a speech on the floor of the House that quoted from Franklin Roosevelt's Four Freedoms speech, where he talked about how necessitous people are not free people. People who are hungry and out of a job are the things that dictatorships are made of. And human rights and liberal democracy are not just about abstract rights on paper, and they're not just about the freedom to be free from violence or the freedom to speak one's mind. It's also the freedom to pursue your dreams and pursue opportunity. It's the freedom to find a home. It's the freedom to be healthy and the freedom to breathe clean air and clean water. Those are all freedoms. And there is a reason why authoritarianism often finds fertile ground in desperation and destitution. And so I believe that if we truly want to protect our democracy, we have to prove to people that it can deliver for them in the tangible ways that they need it to deliver for them in this moment, in lowering costs and making healthcare affordable and accessible for every single person, in guaranteeing a cradle through career support system with paid family and medical leave and universal childcare and strong public schools so that it's actually affordable to start a family again. Those are things that we have to do because they're the right things to do, but also because I believe that all of that is a necessary foundation for the rule of law, for liberal democracy to survive and ultimately thrive.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for your insight, Congresswoman McBride, and it was an honor having you on.
Thank you very much. The honor is all mine.
And to everyone, it has been an honor being your host. This is the last episode I'll be hosting this season, and I hope you all have a wonderful summer.
The DC Bar law student community strives to engage and support law students before you graduate and expose you to the tangible benefits of joining the DC Bar and DC Bar communities. Curated programming allows law students to participate in leadership trainings, substantive content programming, networking with practicing attorneys in fields of interest, writing opportunities, and other activities designed to expand your legal education beyond the classroom. Make an investment in your legal career by joining the law student community. To learn more, visit us at www.dcbar.org or email communities@dcbar.org.